everybody. Do I need the mic? Yes. I need the mic. Okay. Who doesn't love a mic? Everyone in this room loves mics, right? This is the mic room. Thank you so much for joining us here today at Columbia School of Journalism. I know we have a lot of competition, but I think you're in the right place. I'm Sally Herships. I direct the audio program. We're going to have some awesome events here today. There are a total of 3 panels. Our first panel, we're about to get started. We're going to talk to some successful podcasters, sustainable podcasters, about how they have sustained their podcasts. The next panel is going to be the tyranny of the CPM. I love that title so much. Then we're going to have a break for coffee and donuts. And woo, coffee and donuts. And end with a fantastic live show. So stay tuned. Great. Microphones. Okay, here we go. Okay. Okay, so today can everyone hear us okay? Yeah? Hands in the air.
Everybody make some noise. Let's go.
All right. I'm so thrilled to welcome Caroline Guerrera from CEO of Radio Ambulante and Aaron Napperstack from the War on Cars. Thank you so much for being here with us today. The reason that we asked these 2 fantastic folks to join us is they're both in charge of running podcasts that are sustainable and haven't been sold to the big guys. That's a summary. So I think I want to just ask you both, could you describe where are your shows now? How, just give us a brief idea, just in case anyone has not subscribed, which you should do. Tell us a little bit about the format and, how often you go out, that kind of thing. So we'll start with Carolina.
Yeah, thank you for having us. Hi, hello. I'm the CEO of Radio Ambulante Studios. We are a nonprofit media company serving Spanish speakers in the US, Latin America, and beyond. We produce 3 podcasts, Radio Ambulante, which is the flagship podcast that we launched in 2012. It's a narrative, it's like long form audio journalism, personal journalism. We publish 30 episodes every year. The seasons go between September and April, and it's distributed by NPR. We have a second podcast that we launched in 2020. It's called El Hilo. It's an explainer, and every week we go deeper on the most important news in Latin America, and we publish an episode every Friday, and we publish 50 episodes per year. And we launched recently a podcast called Central Series. It's a show dedicated for limited run series, and we launched with the first project in January about the fragility of democracy in Latin America, and we told the story of we told that story through the lens of the Salvadoran president Nayib Bukele. So in total, it's like around 85 episodes per year. El Hilo and Central are independently produced, and the team is remote. We launched the podcast, the company with Daniel Alarcon, who's here, also my husband, and then started in a basement in San Francisco with an idea. Now we have like 34 people between the US, Latin America, and Europe.
34. Wow. Okay. And Aaron.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having us, Sally. So my name is Aaron Napperstack, and I'm a co-host of a podcast called The War on Cars. And it is broadly a podcast about automobile dependence in cities and how to change it. So how to make transit and biking and walking better, how to start to reshape our cities over the next coming decades so that we have less automobile dependence. So it's a real kind of niche podcast, but with a surprisingly, I think, big audience in cities all around the world. There's a lot of people interested in it. There are three of us. I have two co-hosts and fellow founders. We have a small crew of editors, freelance editors that we work with. We've been around since 2018. So we're in our 5th year. And yeah, that's broadly the picture.
Okay, so now we know a little bit about these two organizations and the shows they produce. I want to hear about how you got here. And let's start with me. Let's hear some success stories. What strategies have worked for you? Carolina again.
Resilience is probably the most important the clue for everything. We launched Radio Ambulante. We decided that we wanted to create a podcast inspired by like those great public media shows like This American Life and Radio Lab. And we were always with Daniel, we were always talking about, that episode that we heard. And we were, like, we wish we could have like something like that from Latin America and Spanish about Latinos. We saw clearly the gap because we were that audience that was underserved and could consume like content in English or Spanish. So we started working on that and very quick realized that there was not like a lot of, there was a lot of interest and motivation and people were excited about our idea, but funding was limited for Spanish language podcast. So I think it took us like 5 years to secure funding from foundations. We launched as a nonprofit organization. What I think, what we decided when into 2011, when we had started working on the project, we started learning about how to produce podcast, how to produce audio journalism, because Daniel was a journalist and also a novelist, and I was supposed to be the business side, and we didn't know much about both of those areas, so we had to learn on the job. We put together a team, and we launched a campaign on Kickstarter, and that was a success. That was the first campaign ever on journalism or podcasting in Kickstarter. We raised $46,000. And I think that was very important because it gave us the opportunity to tell people what we wanted to do and bring the seed money to launch. But it took us 5 years after that campaign to prove we were always growing an audience and launched a lot of content. But in 2016, we signed a distribution agreement with NPR. And then foundations started looking at us and we received funding from foundations. So I think what worked was to don't give up. We didn't give up on the product because it was hard at the beginning. For so many years, we didn't have funding or like support, but we were growing an audience since day one and it was exponentially growing. And I think just like securing that agreement with NPR helped us to make other foundations who were not familiar with Spanish language or Latin American content believe in us and give us the.
So just to be clear, the $46,000, that was your first source of funding.
Yeah, and then we have like some foundation support here and there, but we were 5 people until we joined the PR in 2016. And between 2012 and 2016, we published like 12 episodes per year. Only because this is very crafty, it's long form audio is very crafty. And when we joined NPR, this distribution agreement is a revenue split deal, meaning that they sell ads and we have a minimum guaranteed. So we were able to create a more sustainable business model between foundation support and that agreement. We were a small company. And then we started growing from like 5 people to 34. And on top of that, at the time in 2017, we had like half of the budget the annual budget came from that agreement and the other half came from foundation support. And since then, we have added other sources of revenue. So it helped us to build the whole company.
And we'll get to Aaron in a second, but I just want to ask some obsessive anal reporter questions, and we'll take questions from the audience too towards the end of the panel. So the 5 initial employees you had, were they working full time? Were they working part time in the beginning?
Us? like double time, double time,
Double time. For payment.
non-paid or symbolically paid. But there was, like, I'm sorry, Aaron, yeah, there was this riddle, probably you have felt this, that, like when you know that something is like getting extraordinary, there is an audience, there is a great product, and you know that if you stop, nobody will do that because it's too expensive. So for me, it was exciting because it was kind of the riddle of solving the business model and the monetization. We didn't want to give up because what, like if we gave up, like, no, you can't see anything created if you give up. And usually you always have like a lot of obstacles, and mostly in the United States. And on top of that, we are Latinos and Spanish, producing in Spanish. So yeah, so.
And we should say that Danielle Alarcon of Radio Amplante is here if you want to say hi. Okay. Okay, Aaron, over to you.
Yeah.
right.
So, and what was the question again?
How did you, what was your first source of funding, right? Everybody's sitting there, you have the idea.
Right.
And then where you take $20 out of your pocket. And
Yeah,
like,
that's pretty much how it went too. So what's a little different about our podcast from Carolina's is we actually structured ourselves as a for-profit, as a business. So the three of us put ourselves together as a partnership, as an LLC. We actually just started the company out of a production company entity that I already had. So I had a bank account, I had a legal entity, and we just started using the production company, figuring if this works and it grows, we'll eventually spin off our own little company, which we did in about a year. I had previously founded and run a nonprofit publication called streetsblog.org, which is covers a similar set of issues. It's very locally based. We have a streets blog in New York and San Francisco and Chicago, and it covers the same question around how to make cities less car dependent. So I had kind of done that nonprofit model and really wanted to move away from it. We could get into it more, but there's a lot of like paperwork and bureaucracy and other things that I was sort of less interested in. So we're structured as an LLC. We started the company literally by each putting down $1,000 and putting it into the bank account, saying like, this company is capitalized with $3,000, and we were really fortunate in that we had this great producer named Curtis Fox, who is Sally's friend. I think that's how, yeah. So Curtis is an amazing producer and editor who really cares about the set of issues that we cover. And he actually was willing to produce our first 15 episodes, basically for free or for whatever we could pay him. So all of our initial revenue started went straight to Curtis, the producer. We launched the podcast with a Patreon campaign. So, very bootstrappy this thing was. And, when I was telling Doug and Sarah, my co-hosts, like what the topic of this podcast was about, I was like, like what's the secret to like sustainability? And it was like, well, have a spouse with good health insurance, and a real job, because that was definitely part of this. It really did require like substantial runway to do it the way that we did it. And, you needed some other form of revenue or income to survive the first couple years. But we now have a number of pretty good revenue streams, and it's Patreon. So people who subscribe, like pay us a per month fee because they like what we're doing. We have sponsors, and I'm largely the person responsible for getting sponsors. We have a really sponsorable niche, if you think about it. Like, we're talking about how to make cities more bikeable. So you can go to people who make apparel for bicycle commuters, and they're like, wow, you're talking directly to our audience. We do live events, which have done incredibly well. I'm like always surprised that people come out to see us.
So you sell tickets for live
We
events?
sell tickets, and we don't actually, we usually it's every live event we've done, it's been a venue or a conference that has basically done the work and sort of share, they sell the tickets. And
can you give some examples? Like,
yeah, sure. So the two different models, I mean, we were just, if you can believe this exists, there's a winter cycling congress that happens every like other year, every 3 years. And it was just in Edmonton, Alberta. And so they were like, hey, well, the War on Cars come and do a live taping in Edmonton. And we were all like, well, okay, like we've never been to Edmonton. That sounds pretty cool. And so we did that, and they were covering our costs. They invited us up there. we shared the tickets at the door with the conference organizers. And
You guys were like, they're rock stars, right? Like,
yeah, well, we were rock stars. Like there were people like coming up to us and being like, "Oh my God, the war on cars! Like we love you in Saskatoon." Like that's crazy. What are you talking about? Like you're biking in Saskatoon? But they are. They want Saskatoon to be more, bikeable and transit oriented and all of that. So there's fans there, so they showed up and then we sell merchandise. Like that we can get into like the name of our podcast and it turns some people off and it makes other people feel like, hey, this is something I can be part of. Like I'm out there trying to bike my kid to preschool every morning and someone's almost killing me like every 2 weeks. Like I have an encounter with a driver. Like this needs to be better. There's people who feel really strongly about that and they want to enlist in the war on cars. They want to be part of it. They want to be like, and they feel like a community in many ways. So that's an advantage for us, this kind of like very strong point of view. We are definitely, I feel like, using the tools of journalism. I went to this school. I was here in 1993 and 94. And yeah, but we do have an advocacy journalism point of view, which I actually think if you are starting a podcast, like having a really strong point of view and a niche and a specific beat, then this model, this kind of Patreon model can really work for you.
well, wait a second. And bumper stickers because I was like, wait, bumper stickers? No, not the war on cars.
Yeah, no, well, we don't
your merchandise?
we don't encourage posting things on people's cars, but you can.
So what are t-shirts?
Yeah, so stickers, a lot of stickers, and t-shirts and hats, and like people literally like show up to public meetings where there's a big debate about, redesigning a street or building a new bus line, and they'll be wearing like the war on cars, merchandise like at the meeting. And then even like certain mayors have like Mayor Michelle Wu in Boston, like when she was doing her campaign, she put out some videos and she had a bunch of people around her wearing war on cars t-shirts. We were like, are you sure you're gonna get elected, Michelle? Like you seem great. Like maybe don't do that, but it worked. Like she got elected. And but it's a way of like signifying you're part of like a movement in a certain way.
And so Carolina, you guys also, when you and I had chatted before and I found out about some of your models for bringing in funding, I was really surprised because both of these guys go so far beyond advertising. Can you talk about some of your different strategies?
Yeah, sure. So we built a strong community as well. It's very, it's niche in the sense of like Latinos or Spanish speakers. It's not even or not.
Big niche though,
Yeah,
I gotta say.
but I guess we managed to like this community. We have this idea about the community that we want people and our listeners to feel that this is bigger than themselves, and we offer not only extraordinary content that we try always to be the best content ever, but also we create spaces for them to interact with the content, to talk about the content, like the stories of the react. Not only like we have the spaces like the listening clubs, Let's Clubes de Escucha, which are spaces where people get together, listen to an episode and talk about it. And we have like
In IRL, in the real world.
Yeah. So they were created we launched this project in 2019 in 70 cities around the world. And the listener, and we created this space for listeners to organize, but start like piloting ourselves. It's around like 20 people mostly, and they get so now, like years after so many years, we have a system and a leader of community who help to organize and give all these resources and help to create a space where people feel invited. And usually the participants are strangers to each other. They just meet to talk and I don't know, I guess people want to talk about things and they want to react, and many different people who otherwise I guess they wouldn't be friends. I'm not sure if they're friends actually, but they get along and they go listen to the episode. We create like all these like, coloring pages and stuff like that. So like we put a lot of care on it. This is what I mean. And then that project has like now like 20,000 participants every year. in different cities. Some are online after the pandemic. So for example, the Listening Club in New York became like a global listening club. And it has like people in different parts of the world. And then they are friends, they dated, they became partners, like, like everything happened, many things. And so it's like it's a project that took off. And we continue to create. We do live events as well, like as Aaron was describing.
Do you put them on yourselves, or do you, like Aaron was saying, do you find partners?
You usually put it ourselves, but also we create when there is a live show, we partner with the theater. I mean, hopefully it will bring some revenue, but that's the project for the next year. But all these spaces for the community are very appreciated, and now we have a very strong membership program. We didn't launch the podcast with a patron. Patron was not in business when we launched, I guess, I think, but we launched with the Kickstarter campaign, and then had some people donating to a project, to the podcast via PayPal here and there. But it was only in 2019 that we launched an official membership program called the Ambulantes. And the first year and the second year, we raised like $300,000. And last year, for example, we have a deficit now. I mean, it's a moment, one of those moments, as other companies in media and journalism and in podcasting. So we launched, for example, an urgent call in December for the end of the year campaign, and we were able to duplicate our membership program for this year. So these kind of programs, so everything that is based on the relationship with the community is very strong. So we have that, and we have another product that I'm going to mention here that is early in Radio Ambulante, we started surveying the audience, and we realized that we had a steady percentage of Spanish learners. Even when the audience was just like 7,000 people, we have some people like 15, 20%, like saying that they listen to Radio Ambulante to improve their Spanish. So in 2019, or I think it was 2019, we partnered with this technology company called Jive, and we launched,
Can
we
you say
created.
the name of the company again?
Yes, my English, Jive World. Jive World, yeah, it's just a big, but it's called Jive World in Espanol. It was called Lupa, but the company their company is called Jive World and is now launching multilingual. So we developed this app that transforms Radio Ambulante's content and episodes in smart Spanish lessons. So you can lower or the speed, or like speed up. You can select vocabulary. You can, it's shop. It's very smart, but it's really ranked as one of the highest language learning apps on the Apple Store, and we sell it.
The app does that technology. That's what it provides. And
it's a technology that it was manually created. It's not AI. But yeah, so we put the content and they created the technology and the students, and it's very unique because it trains your ear instead of like repeating like, yeah, soy un estudiante, voy a Colombia. This is like more like real accents, and we have identified like 50 accents, different accents. So the goal is that people who are really dedicated can like go to the app, they pay for it, and they need to put some effort on it. But when you go to a city, you can, in fact, really understand and speak. That's the goal, no? Because usually you learn so many languages, and then when you go, you can't say, it's very academic or far from what how people speak. So that's another product that is bringing some revenue. And I wanted to mention those examples because that comes from all the investment that we do on the community.
So it's just striking me now listening to the both of you that you have really so many different revenue streams, which is amazing, but also that you really have a lot of your time goes into the business aspect of things. I think for a lot of people creating content, can't believe I just said that. For a lot of people who are audio journalists or storytellers, we think of reporting, and storytelling, but we're not necessarily thinking about spreadsheets and being business people. What kind of chunk of time do you both spend on business?
I mean, it's funny. That's kind of a lot of my job in the trio is on the business side. And, we just finished our taxes, for example. And that was like,
Congratulations.
yeah, that was a huge pain in the butt, but it's, as long as you kind of get things set up well these days, it's actually surprisingly easy. It's like almost all of the revenue like literally almost every cent is now just coming into us digitally in some form, and it gets plugged into QuickBooks. People, purchase merchandise on Shopify, and that all just kind of like flows without anyone having to touch money into our bank account and and the information goes to QuickBooks, and that goes to our accountant. And there is a pain in the butt aspect to like filing a partnership return, but it's really, it's not so bad. It's not so
I
bad.
can't believe you're not wearing a War on Cars t-shirt. I'm sort of,
Oh,
I feel
I
kind of,
brought some stickers, I think. So I can, yeah, no, I'll give them away. I think people can have them. But no, and then like selling ads though, that's a substantial amount of work. Like, my first job out of Columbia Journalism School was at Spin Magazine, was a music magazine, and I was doing like the internet stuff there, because I actually was very interested in the internet when I was here, and it was like something that you really had to like. There's this thing in the library called the internet, and you can go like access. You had to go like seek it out, and but like so I've always liked whatever the newest form of media is, I think, and what was my whole point? I forgot where I was going with that. I went into my own little reverie of personal history. What was that? Ad sales. Thank you. So, right. So at Spin Magazine, the ad sales guys were these terrible people. All they wanted to do was go do cocaine with the people, the guys from Newport cigarettes or whatever. And now I'm that guy. So there is a lot of work in just having to like, kind of cultivate sponsors, call them up, send them like a sheet that explains the podcast, negotiate rates with them. But I really kind of like it. I enjoy it. I'm enjoying the businessy aspects of it.
great. Okay. Carolina.
Yeah, so I mean, I run this huge company. I mean, I don't know if it's huge, but I envy you so much. I wish I could be just doing taxes with my two best friends or whatever, or co-host. As you see, I'm not the host. I'm the business person. And since the company is long and we have a diversified business model, now I have a team of 4 people working with me on the business side, from like now I have an executive assistant, which is great because only just scheduling meetings and all that is a lot of complications. Also, like I prefer. So we are a nonprofit organization, but I understand what you were saying because it has been very hard to secure funding from foundations to run Ambulante. We do the job, but sometimes it takes like so many, like, I mean, it takes 9 months to 1 year to get a grant. While it's going to business talk, conversations are like very straightforward, and it's like about the added value that we both each, like, what do you want? Why do you want that? I want this. It's so easy, and I really enjoy it. I don't sell ads. We haven't done a lot of ad sales directly, and this is one of the revenues that we are exploring since last year because, as I mentioned, I was on this deficit, but because we are on this. So Radio Ambulante, El Hilo was co-produced with Vice Media, and they went bankruptcy. So that's the reason why we have a hole in our budget. Now, like what I feel is that, so
You guys were part of Vice, is that what you're saying?
yeah, we were like El Hilo, the second podcast, the music podcast explainer was, we signed an agreement with them after a couple of years after launching. We signed a co-production agreement with them, and we were both parties put the 50% of the budget, but their check never arrived, never got here. It was always late until we realized they were like really having a lot of trouble, and so we obviously left that contract, and they sank basically, fired the audio department, but we kept that hole in the budget. The podcast hasn't, we haven't stopped producing or haven't laid off anyone, and we won't. But when you ask about how many hours do you spend on the business side, I don't sleep basically, because the goal is to make sure that we are at the best editorial moment ever. We have the best growing audience, we have impact, and so now on the business side, we have these people, everybody looking for money. Like, for example, the director of operations shifted to business development position, and he's closing deals. But also our team of journalists and producers who are great writers now are like going to start like writing a bit of like grants and stuff, because we don't want to let anyone go, but I prefer to repurpose like 5% of the position, like it's just like moving around. But on the business side now, Daniel is also working on that, like we are many people working now on the business side, and I hope at some point I will find someone who can take my job and I go for a sabbatical.
I was just gonna say, I do think like the key, it sounds like for both of us in some ways, is like having multiple revenue streams. And, we've actually been able to, we're working on our first grant right now. So that's an interesting thing, is that a for-profit entity, a journalistic entity, can accept grant. Like, you don't have to be a nonprofit to accept a grant from a foundation. So that's available to us. We're also doing a book. We just sold a book. So that's there's going to be a War on Cars book, hopefully in 2026. So that's another. So just like having these like multiple revenue streams is really important right now. And then also, I think like keeping it small, like, I don't know if you were joking, like, working with my two friends. I mean, we're sort of like, not really, I mean, we're friends, but we're like all three professionals in this realm. I just think keeping it really small has been important for us, and it definitely makes a lot of work, but it enables sustainability.
I didn't receive that memo.
We'll take questions from the audience in just a minute. But now for my favorite question, which is, tell us about your mistakes or surprises, which is like the nicer way to say that.
Mistakes. I mean, so many of the things that I cited as like, oh, things we did well, they're also just things you could say are mistakes. Like Patreon, going with a Patreon model means you just have to feed this beast endlessly. If you don't keep giving the Patreon subscribers bonus content, so we produce 2 regular episodes a month, and then one that's usually just a bonus for Patreon, and it's just a lot of work. Like, now you have this beast that needs to be fed. That could be considered a mistake. It's really hard to back out of it once you sort of get that flywheel spinning. Oh God, what other mistakes? I mean, we really built our brand and our audience on Twitter, and had an amazing Twitter following, and then like Elon Musk came and destroyed it a few months ago, like really destroyed the mechanism that we were using to build and grow our audience. Nothing has really quite replaced that yet. And I think we've actually even seen a flattening of our audience, but we used to be able to like invite a guest onto the podcast and be like, wow, that guy, that woman, whoever has 500,000 Twitter followers, that would be great for them to be on our podcast and then tweet that out. Like, hey, I was on the War on Cars, like, come listen to me. And we would see like, this kind of slow, steady, organic growth every time we invited one of those guests on. But, I would say like I'm not sure it was a mistake, but like that doesn't exist anymore. And we don't really have a good replacement for it yet.
Sounds like, again, another recommendation for diversification of platforms, Okay, Carolina.
Yeah.
Learning moments.
Yeah. Mistakes, so many that I can't remember. I erased them from my memory. Yeah, is that is that I mean, we're still a small company, and the newsrooms are small, so a mistake is costly. And lately, it feels like you make a mistake and it's so expensive, and the ramifications that it has. I think one of the biggest challenges, we didn't push. It was so hard to get grants and just go and talk to foundations and talk and tell them that we were cool, that it was necessary, needed, I mean, we have all the numbers, a lot of like evidence, and still it's hard to get grants. So we haven't built a development site to just be focused on grants. And now on this deficit, we realized that we have a super diversified business model, and the piece that we're missing is foundation support as a nonprofit organization. So, I think this is something that we're trying to grow on now, like go the development side, because we are at a good place to do it. But we don't want to depend on foundation support, because that's depending on just one source is complicated. And we try to avoid creating extra content for members, but we give them like so many other things. But it's very important to just be present with the community. And sometimes I get so yeah, we were on Twitter as well. We were strong on Twitter, and at some point we started realizing, like a year before Elon Musk became the owner of Twitter. But we were like missing like probably younger people maybe, or something like that. And then we started like having more presence on other social media. So we amended that very, very quick, and we are everywhere. I just want to clarify that it's not that we have an old audience, because actually our audience, Rambulante's audience, is, for example, the youngest that NPR is, the most diverse audience of at NPR, like by the numbers. For example, the industry, or like average of like Black listeners is 9%. Rambulante has 18%. Latinos is 16%. Rambulante has obviously 58%. And stuff like that. But and the average age is 33 years, while NPR's is 37. So we always had a young audience, but like they age with you. And so I guess having presence on all the channels are important. And other things that we were not doing well was, so we got the metrics on the downloads from NPR and Acast for El Hilo and all this, but we always felt that we were not telling the story well. I mean, we still feel that probably we're not telling the story well, because we still don't get all the grants that we want, that we feel that we deserve. But so we also like corrected that. We trying to find a lot of more data. So we know how many downloads we have, but now we know with how many people we interact in every channel per week. So for example, if Rambulante has 1 million downloads per month, we have 5 million interactions in every platform, including the downloads. So that tells a different story, right? So this is the kind of things that we are very reflective. So when we make mistakes, we really like do an autopsy to the mistakes, feel bad, and then find a solution.
So I want to open this up to questions from the audience. Can I see a show of hands? We have an audience question microphone, which you yourself can hold if you have questions. And while I'm waiting for the first brave soul, okay, Danielle, will you pass this mic back? I'm going to turn it on. Okay, great. If you can introduce yourself and ask your question using the mic, that would be great. Thank you. Thank you.
Is the mic working?
Yeah.
Hi, thank you. My name is Lorena Galliot. I'm an audio producer formerly with Along the Media, with the Duolingo podcast and others. And my main question I'm going to do one at a time. I'm going to start with Carolina, and I have to reserve for Adam a little later. My question for Carolina is, the Latino audience niche is it's not a niche, it's a huge niche. And it's a super diverse niche. And what I was wondering is, did you, from the onset or as you went, find a unifying or define a unifying thread to your stories and to the story you told, to try to attract, try to attract Latinos from such a diverse listener base across the Latin American world, maybe Spain? How did you find the unifying thread?
We just bet on a good story. A good story is universal, and it speaks to many people. Starting with Rambulante. Rambulante is really an amazing podcast, and it tells, it's compelling, is human, but it has a plot. It's entertaining, most of it, and we were just betting on the Spanish language, not trying to get a niche. We just wanted to. First, we created this because we wanted to listen to those stories in Spanish, telling a different type of stories that we were like listening just on public media here, or in Espanol, everything that was in Spanish, like mostly like Telemundo, Univision, you know, like so many soap operas and soap telenovelas and stuff like that. It didn't speak to me. So I was consuming podcasts in English because I couldn't find anything that was for me, because I was able to do it, but then we were able to create this. So the goal of the project is just to give more offerings to Spanish language. There, it seems that podcasting has been reserving for like not Latinos or not like so many diverse like folks, you know, and everything that comes around, like sponsorships, ads, business platforms, live shows, monetization. No, everything is not just for us, and we wanted to speak to just like Spanish language and create more of that, not just with Ambulante. So, but I think like also there is this idea that Latinos are all the same. When you are not Latino, probably, or Latin American, as you define, you know, like that we are all the same. Oh, like sometimes it's like, oh, where are you from? Colombia. And oh, my brother lived in Guatemala. And we're like, good for him, you know. It's fine because it's a Spanish language, but probably I do the same with other continents as well, you know. Maybe, oh, I'm Australian. Oh, I went to New Zealand, you know, like maybe I could do that. But so I don't judge people. But what I feel is that people think that Latinos are all the same. And the goal of the project is to complicate the idea that everybody has about Latin America, including us. So I think I know more about Latin America now, but I didn't know that some accents or places or cities or political events like happened or existed before Ambulante. So it's not trying to niche or like how like make the same. You know, it's just speaking to everyone and try to bring them to our.
Thank you. But then I guess, was there something central to when you were choosing stories? You know, what was the filter that made a Radio Ambulante story? How would you decide?
An excellent story.
Simply as that, just that.
The best story possible. There is no good is good enough. The best episode has to be better than the last one. I'm not sure if that happens in reality, but it's like if you give an extraordinary story, people will listen to it. If you tell it like with that, so that's the bet, I guess, and make it. I mean, from different countries, trying to bring voices that they have no spaces on the airwaves, I guess.
Thank you very much. We're
Thank
going
you.
to
Yeah.
pass the mic back. Thank you.
Hi, is the show growing year after year? And if so, how do you balance bringing in new listeners, making sure they're feeling nurtured, you know, understanding the vibe of the show with, you know, making sure that your longstanding listeners are also happy and understand that you have to do things to welcome in new listeners? I ask because I think a lot of people listen to a lot of podcasts, but I think it's very hard to bring in net new listeners to the podcast listening world. So I'm wondering how you go about doing that. And I imagine you probably thought a lot about this because of the language factor.
So that was for me. Yeah. So the podcast has grown since day one. We had 7,000 listeners the first year, and next year we had 70,000, and the next year we had 700,000, and the next year we have 1.5 million, and now we accumulate like almost 60 million downloads. And El Hilo has grown more faster because we had already like an audience to discover our podcast. What was the second question again?
How do you balance welcoming new listeners with making sure your existing listeners, basically, like so many shows rely on their inside jokes, and then the potential new listeners are like, what's going on with this inside joke? And then they give up. I know your show is not very inside joke heavy, but kind of the vibe of that, you know, it's like,
but it's not boring neither. I mean, it's fun. Sometimes it's funny. There are a lot of like human right stories and, you know, like sad stories as well. It's the human experience that is very complicated. Yeah, I guess the same. We focus on the mission for everything. It's like we need to create the best content possible. And I think some people sometimes say, oh, I haven't listened to Rambulante for a little bit, and then they start like listening all the time, like, oh, 10 episodes in a month or whatever. We feel that we are consistently creating the best content possible. People will come, and I think we try that they don't feel alienated. I don't have a plan to not alienate all listeners, but we have spaces for everyone out of the podcast. You know, like the important is that we deliver an episode on Tuesday, Rambulante, on Fridays for El Hilo. It has to be excellent, and then we welcome new listeners. They need to discover us. That's important. And then we have a couple of newsletters, 3 newsletters. We have spaces on social media. We have all these listening clubs happening every week. We have like other spaces so people can like maybe find a place. For us, important is that they come, our listeners, and they feel that there is a community that speak to them. And then obviously there is a funnel that hopefully some of them become members, paying members and donors.
Yeah, what we did with this issue, because it is a big issue, is we created an episode at the very start of the podcast called "Why the World Needs the War on Cars," and we'll often reference back to it. We do get a little bit insidery very often, and we try to just keep in mind that we're trying to attract new listeners too, and to go back and sort of try to explain why we're talking about something, or to just take jargon out of our, edit jargon out as much as possible. Constantly bringing in new guests and also playing with different formats really helps that too. So new guests, they're coming in with sometimes a more political angle or a cultural angle. We'll have like, a celebrity like Nick Offerman will come onto the podcast, and because he's just, he's written a new book that kind of focuses on our issues, and it's just an opportunity to kind of like step back and invite we're always thinking about inviting new listeners in.
Can we pass the mic up to the front, please? Thank you.
Hi. So recently, there's a podcast on the New York Times. It's called Hard Fork, and it's been a huge success. And they decided to go to YouTube. So it's like the first podcast that you can actually watch on YouTube. I don't know the why they made that decision, but I can tell you that when I'm on the subway, people are watching podcasts, all kinds of people. My husband is like a YouTube addict. And so I'm thinking like, why is YouTube not at all a part of both of your business models?
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I realized after the mistakes question, like that was like truly the biggest mistake we made, was not going into video sooner. I mean, that's really, that was what I meant to say in that slot there. We've seen, no, it's really something, it also kind of gets to that Twitter problem, in that, YouTube we're seeing a lot of like urbanist podcasts, or sorry, they're not even podcasts, they're just YouTube shows that are generating audiences that are way bigger than anything we can generate as a podcast. So YouTube video in general has the potential, and I'm not sure what explains this exactly. I think it might have to do with like the algorithmic kind of audience search and building capacities of YouTube. But we're seeing people who we think are making sort of like, I don't know, podcast, YouTube shows that are not really doing anything particularly better than us, and they're just generating substantially higher, like 10x the audience on YouTube. So there's a lot of ways to do YouTube. You don't necessarily have to just have like a camera facing you in a studio, which I think is pretty boring. So we're starting to develop a video component to the War on Cars that is going to be a little bit more like, I almost want to say like PowerPointy, like animation oriented, not so much like look at us talking, but we'll be like explaining something or discussing something. And you'll have visuals with that. And we're going to start with short videos, and I think start to work our way up to longer and experiment with different formats like we do with audio. But yes, like YouTube, and when you talk to a young person, when you talk to someone like my kids' age, like in their like late teens, early 20s, they're like, oh, where can I find your podcast on YouTube? So I think you're totally right. That's like where people are going.
Can we do a quick YouTube poll? How many people in the audience here watch podcasts? What? Okay, and for our friends on the internet, a lot of hands just went up who are maybe watching right now, which you can't see, but I'm telling you, a lot of hands. Okay.
Yeah. I just want to answer to that, like, because our podcasts are scripted. So the mistake, I don't know if it was a mistake, but we were on YouTube too early. We launched in 2012 and we were on YouTube. We had like just like subtitles. All our episodes were uploaded on YouTube, but there was no YouTube for podcasts at the time. And also, but our podcasts are scripted. So basically, if you're not familiar with that, Daniel is the host. He presents the episode, but it was reported by someone else. It's a bit like This American Life, if you have heard, Rolly. It's like every episode, they're getting longer. It's between 35 minutes and 1 hour. So we probably will experiment with shorter videos, not for Ramulate, for the Lilo, but the reason why there is a big push to be on YouTube is because YouTube is the second biggest search engine in the world, and the first one is Google, which owns YouTube. So there is a great place to discover, but I'm worried about a couple of things. If you put your content there, then like your IP will be chopped, and it will be soon on TikTok. Somebody will be just talking about it, transform and other things, and this is something like, it's a challenge for a small company like ours, because we don't have so many resources like to go on a legal battle with anyone, you know. But if we don't control those channels, somebody will appropriate, will just take our content for free. So we need to understand what space can we do. We're gonna start experimenting with like short, I guess, I don't know, some experiments probably with one of the podcasts. But I don't watch anything on YouTube. But our son created a podcast for the World Cup, and we were like, oh, Daniel is the expert. Let's tell, like, no, this is on YouTube. What are you talking about? And he did it by himself with a friend on camera, on video, and yeah, that's it.
Yeah, if I were starting right now, I would absolutely have
You can do
video
it.
as part of the strategy immediately, for sure.
I think for hosted podcasts podcasts like that, conversation like that, I think I have seen many like Zoom meetings on YouTube, and I think that works very well.
Do we have any last? Okay, we'll take one more. We'll take a couple more questions. Okay, Danielle's going to pass the mic. All right.
So I think that is the follow-up question is, when Serial make a huge success, and many like audio journalists, the journalism background audio producers thinking, okay, the audio journalism has a big market. So past 10 years, we see that. But now I did some research. It's like, if you see the daily on the YouTube, the play is not that high. It's a very small number. So my question is, did you think like the audio journalism, the golden age is already past in the podcast? Because probably the YouTube is not the good platform for this kind of show. You know, it's a good show. It's a good platform for the show, like the camera and the three people sitting around the microphone. But it's hard to present an investigation reporting or attract the audience to, you know, watch this kind of podcast on YouTube. So does this golden age past? I don't know. What is your opinion?
What was the question? I'm sorry.
Has the golden age
Of the audio journalism
journalism.
side.
And in the
Narrative.
language that you're talking about,
Yeah.
in Spanish, I don't think so. I think in Spanish, it's like podcasts are just blooming now, and there were like many deliberate efforts by Spotify to grow in Latin America. So there is an audience like Burger, McDonald's, podcast, Spotify, you know, now, but they left. Many people with no money now, but people listen to podcasts. So I think there is an opportunity. The world is big. The problem is that when you compare yourself to like Gimlet Media, who sold to Spotify, no, like if you compare yourself with This American Life that has like 4 million downloads per episode, we don't do, you know, like we're much smaller. I think there is space for everyone. I'm not sure what's the golden age is, because at the golden age, what all the companies did here was centrify, like give all the power to platforms. And for me, even with a deficit and our company, I think we are at our golden age. And there is a lot of, I don't see, I'm exhausted, I have to say, but I only see opportunity. You know,
Well,
because
and
everything,
and
yeah.
the fact that, like, you know, at the end of a podcast, people still say, you know, listen to the War on Cars and you can get it where, you know, wherever you get your podcast from. The fact that like that still exists, that it's not like just some small number of platforms, but like you can, you know, podcasts are still in a kind of independent space, like the old internet, in this kind of open, independent space where you can start a podcast very inexpensively and you can go to any platform and you can, you know, Libsyn or Acast or Megaphone, whatever. I think that means we still are in the golden age because you're going to get a lot of independent voices because it does not cost a lot to start something and you're not beholden to a big platform, which to me is the golden age. It's not, you know, you might not get like $50 million for your podcast, like, you know, Joe Rogan or someone, but this ability for many voices to flourish is still there.
He has the patrons, we have the members. That's very motivating. Yeah.
We'll do one last question. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. First of all, my question's for Carolina. I have not listened to War on Cards, but I look forward to because I am that mom trying to get my kid to school in the morning on a bike every day. Soy mega fan de Radio Ambulante desde el inicio, así que muchas gracias por el trabajo que hacen. My question is about your distribution partnership with NPR. I'm just curious, obviously you've been able to maintain your autonomy and everything that you do. I'm just curious how dependent you are on that relationship in terms of distribution and getting it out there. Obviously, we've seen NPR cut some very amazing shows recently, and I'm just wondering how stressful that was for you and how vulnerable you feel to that relationship.
It's stressful I mean, it's like 8,000 journalists lost their job last year, and it's calculated that 150 outlet media shut down. So it's very stressful as an industry. It's like a lot of pressure, and so many podcasts have been like out of business, and those are our colleagues. Like you know, like I mean, but we are an independent company that we created a very healthy agreement with NPR 7 years ago. It took us a year to negotiate, just to make sure that we will always preserve the independence. So we have fully independence editorially and also like as a company. So for example, all the derivatives, adaptations, the IP that we're doing, some of that, like movies and stuff like that, we're doing some of that. We kept educational. I think when you partner with a mission like organization, we are mission driven, both organizations, and we give each other value. And we never wanted to feel small. So even when we were negotiating with NPR and we had to put, we didn't know, are we continue as a nonprofit or for profit, you know, like stuff like that. We were like really thirsty. We had no like funds, but we were sure that we negotiated as equals. And I think they respect that. And we are a fully independent organization, and NPR used to cover then 50% of the budget. Now is 1/5 of the company, you know, it doesn't even cover Ambulante fully. So the newsroom, I mean. So, and yeah, I think they could do more to promote, to grow the podcast, but we have 6 people on engagement, and, you know, we have done, is the price to be independent is not letting other people to take decisions for you, and we are owners of our own path.
Guys, thank you so much. We're going to take a short break. Then we're going to come back with Professor Robert Smith in the back and folks from Tink Media and Multitude. So big hand for our panelists.